The voice of sharing during ASEAN.
ASEAN Dailies. First and foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Durian ASEAN. You're with Grace.
Hello, good morning. This is Gowri.
And we are at ASEAN Dailies, where we deliver news from Southeast Asia. So let's start with this looks like non-stop air pollution, which is haze. Well, just yesterday, there was this update on haze in Malaysia. From yesterday evening, it will be better from yesterday. But then apparently in Singapore, our neighboring country, the conditions got worse. And also, they were about to sue these companies. They have been producing all this pollution so far.
And I think even in Malaysia, although there were news that things were actually getting better, what happened was things actually got worse. I mean, when I was on my way back, I was in the train and I could barely see any building outside. And even this morning, the haze was still quite bad. And I think you could still barely see any of the tall buildings outside. And like you mentioned, it's non-stop, it's an ongoing thing, and it brings us back to this whole ministers meeting that happened. All the ASEAN ministers came together. Although it was supposed to be a meeting about transnational crime, they started talking about haze because that was the more pressing issue, and that was their main priority at the ministers meeting.
Of course, ASEAN has come up with this act called Transboundary Haze Pollution Act, but then it also looks like even if with this policy and act, there looks like there has not been any actions taken properly to sort of erase this whole air pollutions regional wise, because these three countries, especially Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia, we have been affected by this haze, and this is not the first time. At the same time, it's the worst time after years. So for weeks, this haze from neighboring Indonesia has affected many parts of Southeast Asia. And then, like we have been mentioning, this polluting air is really unhealthy. And a lot of schools have been closed, and also even health-wise, especially young kids, they've been coughing and also sent out to the hospital.
Right. And I think even in Singapore, as I've reported last night, the PSI has gone up to 203, and that's quite a bad number. Once it reaches 200, it gets to a different level of unhealthy environment for people to be in, and the last thing we want is for that to go up to 300.
For sure.
And that means that everybody would have to stay indoors and have your mask on all the time. And according to our Deputy Prime Minister, Zahid Hamidi, who was also present at the meeting, he said that he actually was being sarcastic, that he said we are enjoying the haze that was imported from our neighbor, and he's also hoping that Brunei, Singapore, Malaysia so far has been very tolerant neighbors, but it's a major ASEAN problem that needs to be solved. And he also said that if we let this drag, this haze could actually be the reason why these 3 or 4 countries don't get along. It might cause some problem or some rifts with our diplomatic relationship.
But this is the thing. Whenever I see a problem raised from one country and it affecting other neighboring countries, it looks like it's very easy to blame on certain countries. You see the origin, but however, when we think about it, it's not entirely Indonesia's fault.
Of course.
Yeah, like I mentioned that there are companies from Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore. They have been sort of involved in this activity / burned all those activities, and then they are the one who produced all this haze, caused haze pollution so far. So Well, yes, our Deputy Prime Minister, he was being a bit sarcastic and making comments. However, but then we also need to look back at our problem and then also relations, because we are coming towards the end of this year and we want to conclude so many projects at the moment. So we really don't want to jeopardize relationship with our neighboring countries. So, and we also believe that there are ways to solve this problem. And of course, this haze generated by, especially in Sumatra and in Kalimantan, really need to be looked at not only from the Indonesia perspectives, but then, like he mentioned, yes, or from the ASEAN perspectives.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The way to solve this problem is to go to the roots of it and to find out. I mean, the main reason is the open burning by all these companies, palm oil plantations, land clearing, and if we could just find an alternative to that, a better way to go about with land clearing or trying to clear out the land for new plantations, or even just cleaning up, there has to be a better way to do this, because we cannot be facing the same thing year in and year out, and like you said, blaming each other, and at the end of the day, next year the same thing happens again, and then there's no point for all these meetings to even take place.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's move on to the next news, where we can still stay in Malaysia. Apparently this is about 1MDB, and we have not been really updating on this news, but then apparently
blame the haze.
Yeah, the haze has really channeled our focus. Well, but Malaysia's 1MDB says it's not contacted by foreign investigators apparently. This issue is still hot, to be honest, and then public really wants to know the truth behind it. But whatever the news that we have been getting from the government or from even our source, we have got to the level where we can't trust them anymore.
Right, and it also comes in a very contrasting ways as well, because there's been news before this saying that 1MDB has been contacted by foreign investigators, that they were investigated by the FBI from the US. But the president, Arul Kanda, told Reuters on Tuesday that they have not been contacted by any foreign investigators at all over all the allegations about the mismanagement of funds. And of course, this is a little funny, I would say, because it does contradict all the other reports that has been out. And you're saying earlier that this issue is still hot in Malaysia, and I think it should always be hot in Malaysia because Malaysians want to know. I mean, if the Prime Minister is corrupt, we deserve to know. And if he is not corrupt, then of course we will back him up and stand by him. And I think that's why it's very important for people that they want the investigations to go on, and they want to know where did all the money come from, or what's the deal with this whole 1MDB.
And also, according to Swiss authorities, mentioned that they had open criminal proceedings against these two 1MDB executives for suspected corruption and money laundering, of course. And also, they froze several tens of millions of dollars at Swiss bank in the conjunction to the problems as well. So these are the facts that have been, released so far. And if our government still, or even the 1MDB, the whole investment fund development bank, is going against these all those facts, there's no way the public will just trust whatever they're saying, because we are not stupid anymore. We can get the sources from outside as well.
That's right. And according to Channel News Asia as well, this controversy has, of course, tempered with a lot of things. One of it is the Malaysian market, the ringgit, how it lost quarter of its value against the dollar, and we've also become Asia's worst performing currency, and Malaysia's bonds have also fallen. I think it's also a matter of perception when all these foreign countries or investors look at us at the moment, not too sure if they want to get involved in Malaysia with all the turmoil that's ongoing. So the better we solve this, of course it probably doesn't directly affect the markets in Malaysia, but it does have some sort of an effect on us.
Correct. So we'll come back after this short break. Stay tuned. We'll be discussing on the political side of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Triana ASEAN. You're still with Grace.
And you're still with Gowri.
Right. So let's move on to our news commentary on the political side.
Right.
Well, the first news, we can travel to Thailand, which will be talking about the Thailand's outcasted the PM files criminal case against his opponent.
And what we have is our Thailand's ousted Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra, who was pushed from the office more than a year ago, is sort of making a comeback by making criminal charges against her opponents, and she's filing her own lawsuit. And this just happened yesterday, actually. And Yingluck actually was, of course, the Prime Minister in Thailand, but there were a lot of controversies surrounding her back then, especially because of a certain subsidy that she was providing to the farmers and whatnot. And she's coming back to sort of sue the opposition side, the one who actually got her ousted, to say that the whole base was actually not solid.
Well, at the same time, she did complain, also said that the Attorney General and those others were guilty of this oaths, negligence out of duty, and also this effort to damage her. And of course, there will be some kind of action, and also the opponents, the reaction towards her. Being when she was an ex-prime minister, but now she has got to the point where she is coming to the public again to say things that what opponents had done to her, and she was citing all this illegal violation, this punishable by ranging from the 6 months even to 10 years in prison, and of course it's all up to the court who will decide whether to let this case proceed or just forget about it.
Right, and I think it's very interesting that it's happening now. I mean, we know that Thailand is under the military rule at the moment, and the people are not too happy. And it could also seeing Yingluck Shinawatra making a comeback to the political scene as well. I mean, she has been doing things here and then, but never really been so vocal or so adamant about something as making a law case against people who actually against her opponents, basically. And she's coming back into the scene now, and she said that she's here to exercise her rights in accordance to the legal process, and she has submitted the lawsuit against her Attorney General and team members. And she had a lot of accusations as well that caused a lot of loss in money back in Thailand while she was still Prime Minister. But she also, of course, has her own fair share of supporters, and who knows, this could actually also sort of be a wake-up call to the military government, if in any way possible, because they are also trying to shift from a military government to a democratic, but we're not too sure when that is going to happen.
Well, in Thailand, it's still a huge question there. Of course, they have already sort of settled to have this all-military system in Thailand, regardless of the happiness level of public. But but we are just hoping for the best, of course, in Thailand. Let's move on to the next news, which is about this news regarding the unions that agreed on a $40 on a month wage rise, and they have agreed just yesterday to seek a $40 per month increase in the minimum wage for these garment workers. And but all those factory owners are this is according to the factory owners, and they are offering the raise of $6 only.
Right, and it's very interesting to see this happening, because for months and months they have been trying to come up with a lot of appeals, a lot of pleas, a lot of meetings, and trying to get a raise in their monthly wage. And I think a lot of the companies as well this is in Cambodia, by the way, and even all the companies were not too happy that the labor unions are actually asking for a rise in pay. I guess nobody likes that when their workers want a rise in their pay.
Of course.
And even though these companies are actually making a lot of money, they were still adamant that, to keep the monthly wage to a very minimum level. But it seems like towards the end, they are actually successful, that they have managed yesterday, agreed to seek a 40-month increase in the minimum wage for all the garment workers, while factory owners, according to the officials, offering a raise of $6.
Yeah.
So I think they have not really found that common ground still yet. They are still negotiating, because the unions still want it to be a bit more, but the factory owners are still trying to keep it to a minimum of just a $6 raise in Cambodia.
That's really unfair, because I mean, they are all hiring these people to produce the product and so on, and then just the minimum wage rate is so very, very limited, and how can people really survive with the 6, or even if let's say maximum $10 per month? It's really small amount in the increment I'm talking about. And of course there are lots of disagreement between these two parties, and hope that all the partners are mature enough to come up with the common agreement here, and also both parties are happy. But then the workers will be happy to work for the factory or industry eventually.
Right, and I think what they're getting now is about $128 a month for like a 50-hour work week, and what they're going for an increase in $40, so that the new salary will be at least $168 per month. And of course, the president of the collective union has also called this agreement historic, because it's the first time that they have all been able to arrive at a common ground and to fight for it together. And all these unions, like I said earlier, they're still not able to agree with the negotiations that's being proposed by the employer side, the big factories, who are the employers for this. And I think Mr. Sina is just hoping that the factory owners will be honest and reasonable with their negotiations with the union.
We also hope that we can hear some positive feedback from both sides, and also be able to make them happy. But then, when you hear things from the businessmen perspectives, they like to say, all those workers, they always complain about their unhappiness when it comes to wages. But then there is always a reason why. So perhaps the communication and the negotiation is needed here to be able to solve these problems here in Cambodia, especially in the garment industry.
And I think we also need some motivation, and sometimes a higher salary can do that for the workers, and it can increase their productivity.
Well, let's move on to the Philippines now. Apparently, President Aquino is not going to give up on the proposed Bangsamoro Basic Law, which is also called BBL, which was aimed at setting up a new autonomous region in restive Mindanao. Despite this delays in the Congress blamed in part on members, especially in the House of Representatives, who continue to play very hooky.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So under these Bangsamoro Basic Law, the BBL, the government is supposed to set up a new Bangsamoro region aimed at bringing justice and also lasting peace to the resource-rich but strive southern Philippines. And Mindanao is of course trying to be an autonomous region even within Philippines itself. And there's been a lot of appeal for that in the past, and I think this is one of President Aquino's aim or move that he's trying to get done in his final months of presidency as well. And its initial core territory is to come from the autonomous region in the Muslim Mindanao, composed of a few provinces like Maguindanao, Basilan, Tawi-Tawi, as well as Marawi City. And what's interesting about this is, of course, I think it's something new to the Philippines, but it has already happened in Indonesia, where Aceh is actually an autonomous state under Indonesia, and that's what they're trying to achieve with Mindanao as well. And it's falling under President Aquino's shoulders to get this one done.
Well, earlier, the communication secretary Hamino Koloma, he pointed out that all those debates on the BBL would take back seat at the moment while Congress was deliberating on the proposed national budget for 2016. So it looks like there are quite a number of projects going on for coming years. And also this is the highest priority of the Congress at the moment, and then the timely passage of the national budget as well. So he was just stressed in explaining why all these discussions on the BBL would have to be shelved in the meantime by the House and the Senate. So all those reasonable argument, I will say, when it comes to certain laws and the policies here really need to be discussed properly. And because, like you mentioned, he's coming towards the last month of his position in the Philippines, and of course he will want to do something to make sure that he it marks the sort of marks a huge sort of like importance in the Filipinos history. So
that's also the highlight of his career.
Yeah,
probably.
exactly. Yeah. So, but then on ASEAN level and also regional level, we hope to hear the positive and also good news from the Philippines. And also hoping that the election is there. So all the focus will be there very soon on the elections in the Philippines. So we'll take another short break. When we come back, we'll discuss on the economic side of Southeast Asia, so stay tuned.
ASEAN Dailies. First and foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing, and you're with Grace.
And you're with Gowri.
On ASEAN Dailies, we'll deliver news from Southeast Asia, and this segment, let's focus on economic side of Southeast Asia, and we're talking about ASEAN integration, and let's see what we have to say about this. And it looks like when it comes to ASEAN economic integration as well as the ASEAN as a whole, according to the Vice President Jojo Mar C. Binay, he mentioned that inclusive growth is the most important goal of this ASEAN economic integration. And he had this speech at the second ASEAN Fixed Income Summit, and he mentioned that he believes growth is meaningless if it does not redound to the good of everyone, or at least to the great number.
And he's also of the opinion that the poor actually have a chance to become poorer if they have no access to all these basic opportunities that middle class and high income earners take for granted. And he said that he pointed out that despite the recent economic developments brought by the planned ASEAN integration, a very significant number of the population in the region's countries still remain poor. And I think he has a very good point here. We do have a lot of poor countries in Southeast Asia, and even when it comes to the ASEAN Economic Community, there were concerns about how these few countries that are lagging behind can actually catch up, especially with the likes of Singapore, which is way ahead of most of us. And what exactly is being done, since we're not allowed to directly get involved in another country's affairs anyway. So how exactly are we going to help out these countries to make sure that they can also rise to the competition and have that edge when it comes to the ASEAN Economic Community?
And then also it is really important to stress out about ASEAN leaders who should possess all this political will to ensure the success of economic integration. Well, it is really also up to the political will of every leader that will effect this necessary adjustment to match or synchronize the country's infrastructure system and also law with the goals of ASEAN. And it is also the political will that enables each country to honor this commitment towards the transformation of the region into one united ASEAN. We're talking about one united ASEAN. For example, all those European countries, they took such a long time to come up with the one currency, one sort of whole community system. And for ASEAN, we have just started, even though ASEAN was established a long time ago. Now we are talking about ASEAN economic integration, the community, and then also single market here. So even though it still has the vibe and also feel of the rushing into just making one single market, but it is also up to the ASEAN leaders to be patient and to make sure that this transformation is successful with the wise decision and also adjustments.
And I think what he's looking at is also very basic. I wouldn't say. More like opportunities, actually, basic opportunities that they deserve as well, like what other middle and high income countries are already having or taking for granted. For example, easy transportation, education, healthcare, and to these poor countries, these are some things that could definitely help to improve their lives, but at the same time it's something that they don't quite have yet, and he thinks that should be one of their priorities, that they should work to level the production base, although that I'm not sure how is that going to happen for all the 10 countries to level their production base, but he thinks that is the primary step in order to achieve an equitable growth in the region.
Yes. So the question here is, which we need to ask to all of us, which is where is all this inclusiveness when it comes to ASEAN integration growth here? So that is something that we really need to consider.
I think his whole point is that there's no point of having all this growth if it only benefits the rich people, because that's not what we're looking at here. When we talk about an economic community, an integrated community, he wants everybody to be able to have access to the same kind of opportunities, to the same kind of basic necessities, so it's equal for everybody. That's and they all true. Have the same chance.
Well, let's move on, but we can still talk about the ASEAN here. Apparently there is much to be lauded in the agreement, particularly its focus on the opening sectors to competitions and also breaking down the trade barriers, and we're talking about the ASEAN trade here. So the benefits of this all implementation, it will lift this aggregate output by 7% by 2025, and also generate around 14 million new jobs. And but however, these benefits are unlikely to happen in full if agreements on labor mobility for skilled workers are not implemented.
Right, and I think apart from what we mentioned earlier, which is whether or not the AEC is going to benefit everybody, not just the rich, another problem that ASEAN is facing at the moment is the brain drain, and which is why we are looking at whether or not, at least by 2025, we could generate about 14 million new jobs for all our youth in the region. And recent studies have actually shown that rather than protecting the countries from brain drain, with the current policy setup, it's actually encouraging ASEAN's best workers to leave the region entirely. I'm not sure how true is this, but I think what we're also looking at when it comes to the ASEAN integration is to have a freer move of labor in the region, that is easier for them to move from one country to another country. And there's also another survey that says over 80% of all migrants from Thailand and the Philippines actually find work outside of ASEAN, and the figures are not much better for Vietnam and Indonesia as well. And why exactly is this happening? Why are we losing all these people and they're going outside of ASEAN to look for opportunities?
I think I know the reason why now, because of the currency drop. Perhaps because after all, this skilled labor, I mean, they want to go for the better lifestyle and also be able to sustain their living. But then if they are not getting the enough sort of the wages or their salaries, of course they will look for other opportunities outside of ASEAN. So it is sort of our weak part still yet when it comes to free movement, when it comes to skilled laborers and also other areas in ASEAN. So it is something that it is still a challenge for ASEAN to come up with a better solution and a policy, but we have to come up with a better labor mobility for skilled workers that should be, benefit. They should give benefit to all our nations in ASEAN.
Because when this keeps happening, what's going to happen to ASEAN eventually is we are going to have a very severe shortage of skilled labor in all our countries. So it's definitely something that needs to be addressed and see how we can retain all these people in ASEAN countries and keep them here.
Sure. So we'll take another short break. We'll come back and we'll talk about our social-cultural part of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Driana ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. You're with Grace.
And you're with Gowri.
So we are at the last segment of ASEAN Dailies that we can focus and discuss on the social culture part of Southeast Asia. So let's talk about the ASEAN Para Games, and that will happen in Singapore for the 8th ASEAN Para Games. And there are 3,000 athletes and also officials from around the region will be participating in these games in Singapore.
Right, and with its largest contingent of 166 para-athletes representing the city-state, this multi-sports event will take place from the 3rd to 9th December, and it's said to be a game changer for disability sports in Singapore. This is according to their Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, Lawrence Wong. And he also hopes that this ASEAN Para Games will actually inspire more from the disabled community to take part in sports, because that is ultimately their goal, not just to have a successful game, but to leave behind a lasting legacy. And I'm quite happy to see them putting so much of emphasis in making this Para Games happen, and to get so many people involved in this and to be active in sports, regardless of what you're capable of.
For sure, and then that's really inspiring. And at the same time, they talked about the budget for this game. They have set aside something close to $75 million for this game. So with a good motive and also good initiation, I'm sure they are also well supported by certain organizations for this game as well. So all the Singaporeans can definitely look forward to these road shows to try out their sports, and also opportunities to interact with all those para-athletes representing this nation in the months leading up to Para Games.
Right, and I think what's interesting about this is they are not just looking to have another ASEAN Para Games. It's not just another event for this para-athletes, but they're looking to actually revolutionize the whole thing, to get more people involved, more people active, and they want to change or probably even set up a whole new model that other countries can follow in the future when it's another country's turn to host this ASEAN Para Games.
Hope that Malaysia can take to hold this ASEAN Para Games in the future, near future. Well, let's talk about Malaysia here. Apparently there's very interesting news that apparently most Malaysians, they choose to pay less for slower internet speeds instead of spending more on the fast connections, and that's really sort of a question we can raise from here. And that there are a wide range of internet speeds in Malaysia, but then about 71% of Malaysian internet users prefer to have a slower stream mix broadband package that offers a speed between just 384 kilobytes to 1 megabytes only.
I think this whole thing is very interesting because it was all over social media, all over Facebook, and this was actually said by our Communications and Multimedia Minister, Datuk Seri Dr. Saleh Said. And it all happened when our opposition, someone from the opposition party, Lim Kit Siang, started grumbling about the slow internet speed in Malaysia, which I think not just Mr. Lim Kit Siang, but a lot of people have been complaining. And his rebuttal to that is that, hey, it's not my fault. Malaysians want to pay less, and they're okay with slower speed of internet. And of course that I don't think that's true at all, and I don't need any research to back that up. We all want access to faster internet, but it's not quite possible yet in Malaysia. And I think the issue here is also that they are expecting our minister to be more occupied with blueprints or blogs or proper research on how to turn Malaysia into the front line of information technology and make it an IT hub and to make use of all the internet. But our internet infrastructure seems to be lagging behind, according to Mr. Lim Kit Siang.
And at the same time, well, there should be a sort of better suggestion from the government or even the companies that internet and all the services are affordable, but then they can also provide a higher speed. And in fact, he was mentioning that perhaps we should just force them to switch to use the 5 megabytes and force Malaysians to buy this higher speed package. But it is very hard to change and also hard to just to force people to buy certain things because they still prefer and they don't mind using this cheaper and slower internet services at the moment.
I think a lot of people are totally okay with paying more for faster internet because it's become an internet age. The time that we're living in right now, everything is available online, and I think that definitely Malaysians will not say no to faster internet, even if the cost will be higher. But the fact is that we are actually already paying quite a high price for the current speed that we have, although it's not so fast. And I think that is another thing that most Malaysians want to resolve, if possible at all, because according to our minister as well, he wants to ensure that at least 50% of urban areas and 20% of rural areas have access to broadband speeds of at least 100 megabytes per second.
That's a really high speed we're talking about. So hope that we can achieve to use a higher internet speed and to be able to use this internet without any worries of payment. I mean, the affordability is something that Malaysians are looking forward to achieve. So hope that all those companies can come up with a package, but then something that all Malaysians can afford, and also to be able to use this high coverage and speed in the future. So that's it for our ASEAN Dailies today. Look for us on our social medias on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and as well as our website at durianasian.com.
And if you want to listen to us on the go, you can always download our very own Durian ASEAN app on your mobile phones.
So stay tuned for the next interview. We'll be talking about saving fuels and also alternative energy in Malacca, all the way in Malacca. So stay tuned.